Well, welcome back as we look at some of the translation concerns for Romans chapter 3, verses 19 through 20. It's interesting as you do some version comparisons, you might find it helpful to look at the NIV, the Holman Christian Standard Bible, and even the English Standard Version as they look at, especially verse 20, where it says, for example, in the NIV, "Therefore no one will be declared righteous in God's sight by the works of the law. Rather, through the law we become conscious of our sin." The Holman Christian Standard says it this way, that no one will be justified in his sight. Notice how the Holman does not have the word therefore. And Holman continues, "in his sight by the works of the law, because the knowledge of sin comes through the law." So the difference is knowledge in Holman Christian Standard, and the NIV makes mention of the word conscience, or is aware. The conscience is the interior of the heart, and but the Holman seems to guide us toward my mind. I have knowledge of what is going on in my life, and that comes through the law. Now, the ESV renders the translation this way: "For by the works of the law." So you'll see between the three, ESV uses the word "for." The Holman Christian Standard uses the same, "for," but then the NIV uses the word "therefore," and "therefore" helps us to go back to verse 19. So it finalizes the thoughts of verse 19. That's how the NIV would render it. But back to the ESV, it says, "For by the works of the law, no human being will be justified." Notice "will be" is used same in ESV and also Holman Christian Standard. And NIV likewise uses the same term, "will be justified in his sight," since through the law comes knowledge of sin. Again, knowledge of sin is used both in Holman Christian Standard, ESV, and then NIV drops that term out. So what do we have here in regards to the translation tension that you might have in as we look at the new perspectives of Paul? Well, I would like you to look at your Bibles and particularly look at verse 19 and 20. And in verse 19, you have the term "every mouth will be silenced," or "the whole world is accountable." Those are two important statements, phrases that Paul uses. Now, the first use of the law that he mentions here is in regards to the law, the Old Testament, the general revelation that God has given to the nation of Israel. It would be a canonical term in reference to the whole of the Old Testament. And then the second use of the law is in a general sense, going back to just natural revelation. Again, the Gentiles know the law, it's written on their hearts, and thereby they are condemned for not recognizing that in their life. Now, the Jew has the law, the special use of the law, the canonical sense, and it's been given to them. So here he brings them into the courtroom and begins to go into the details regarding the judicial nature of how the law is to be worked out in the person. So therefore, is this inclusion that he begins in verse 19, and then later he uses it as a thrust in verse 20. Maybe it seems as Douglas Moo and other Westerholm conclude that he is just finalizing his thoughts in verse 20. So in the next part of this video, I will attempt to kind of bring some final views here of the new perspective on how they might look at verses 19 and 20 and apply their perspective in regards to the principles they see moving in the law and how Jewish people apply that, whether that is a covenant nomism being applied or not. So we'll look at that in the next video. this is some things to work through as you look at the translation.